I'll just going to say a few words and then we'll get on with the real part of the day, which is to hear all the experts talk us through exactly how we're going to manage this current situation. But it is a great honour not only to be the chairman of the County Councils Network, but to be here today and opening the conference in Marlow. So, as is customary, I would like to start with a few important thank yous. First of all, to our strategic and conference partners who most generously supported this annual gathering. Secondly, again, I'd like to thank the CCN team who organise our conference, I think, so professionally year on year. And finally, of course, to the politicians and the officers from our member councils. It is always difficult for all of us to find time in our diaries, but I think it's an absolute testament to the strength of the CCN to see all of you here today. So when I stood here 12 months ago to deliver this opening address, I think there was undoubtedly an air of optimism in the room. We'd emerged from the pandemic to meet for the first time in 2 years. There was genuine hope that we could move on from the devastating consequences of coronavirus. But fast forward to today, and we gather here again against a more uncertain backdrop. No one could have predicted the economic and political events that have taken place over the past 12 months. A post-pandemic global economic downturn, energy, food and commodity prices driving up inflation and creating, of course, a cost of living crisis. 3 British prime ministers in as many months. And only last week, the autumn statement that has reset the government's fiscal plans. But you are the heart of our communities, and you know how much the cost of living crisis and economic downturn is already impacting on the lives of your local residents. Economically, we know that it's likely to get worse before it gets better. County authorities are, of course, stepping up to provide financial support, frontline services, and targeted help to those most in need. However, we could only do as much as our funding envelope allows. In the lead up to the autumn statement, our network has done more than any other part of the sector to demonstrate the financial challenges facing local governments. In the national media, in letters and private discussions with ministers and officials, we have been crystal clear on the implications that further spending cuts would have at a time when rampant inflation and increasing demand for our services is adding billions of new pressures to our budgets. CCN have also led the way in articulating why, given these pressures, charging reforms in adult social care must be delayed. As a direct result of our advocacy, the outcome of the autumn statement is much better than many had expected, at least over the short term. We achieved our minimum aim of sparing of councils from cuts over the next 2 years and delaying the rollout of the adult social care reforms. Importantly, CCN succeeded in securing £6 billion in adult social care and discharge funding. I was in constant contact with the Chancellor, luckily he is a Surrey MP, over the past few weeks, and I know, we all know, he faced tough choices. I am therefore very grateful that he has listened to our advocacy. It will make a big difference over the next 2 years. Of course, financial challenges and difficult budget decisions remain, particularly in the medium term. Council tax flexibility, while ultimately needed, puts more pressure on struggling family budgets and is not a short-term or even a long-term solution. Our councils will do all that they can to deliver efficiency savings, protect frontline services, and keep council tax low. But unless government tackles inflation and the economy picks up, our member councils still face a funding shortfall next year, with the gap growing year on year thereafter. As we lead up to the local government settlement and look beyond the current spending review, CCN will continue to outline the pressures our councils face and the consequences for local services. While influencing the financial decisions of the government remains paramount. This is just one dimension of CCN's advocacy. We must take the opportunity of a new government in Westminster to redouble our efforts to influence their wider domestic policy agenda. We need to demonstrate beyond doubt the essential place-based leadership role of county authorities, doubling down on the priorities articulated through our recent 5-point plan for county and unitary authorities. Across our plan, we outlined how CCN can work with government to deliver existing manifesto and legislative commitments, while proactively shaping and supporting the new objectives of ministers. At the heart of this is a commitment to work with government in supporting families with the cost of living crisis, boosting local growth and productivity while reforming public services. It is on the issue of public service reform I now want to turn to. While the introduction of a cap on care and extended means test in adult social care have rightly been delayed, we cannot allow the reform agenda to wither on the vine. That's why social care reform and health integration will be centre stage at this conference. Tomorrow, building on our groundbreaking work with Newton, we will consider how we recover and transform adult social services to create the right foundations for introducing charging reforms from October 2025. But it is clear we will not reform social care without significantly improving its integration with the wider health system. This is an agenda I'm passionate about. In delivering meaningful integration, we have taken a huge leap forward this year with the Health and Care Act, placing integrated care systems on a statutory footing. ICSs offer the potential to transform the ability for councils to work more strategically with their NHS colleagues at a local level, building on joint initiatives such as the Better Care Fund. However, they also present new challenges, not least the risk that the vital work of councils becomes superseded within the ICSs by NHS priorities, particularly around acute care. That's why I'm pleased to announce the publication today of our new report from Empower, the evolving role of county authorities in integrated care systems. This report offers the first analysis of the progress of ICS establishment from a local government rather than an NHS perspective, compiled from the experiences and views of our member councils and the wider sector. The report presents a mixed picture. Councils up and down the country have been investing significant time in moving their ICSs forward, but with integrated care plans, of course, due to be signed off shortly. But every ICS is evolving differently, with mixed models of governance, particularly in county areas where we do not have coterminous boundaries. Some are developing positive place-based arrangements to overcome this, whereas others are so far less progressive. Most urgently, our report recognises that whilst most of our member councils have so far been encouraged by the progress being made, there is an awareness that the new systems are yet to be stress-tested. Winter pressures and fiscal tightening are likely to place pressure on the systems in the coming months and years, and we're now entering a crunch point. The risk is that although they offer the best value yet for collaboration, we must ensure that there is not too much focus on acute healthcare within ICSs. The Chancellor's announcement of an independent review into the autonomy and accountability of ICSs by Patricia Hewitt provides the opportunity to make this case. I'm delighted that Patricia has asked me to join the review team and to support this critical piece of work. In approaching my contribution to this review, I want to be clear that local government has no intention of interfering with the healthcare decisions that the NHS makes. But it is my firm belief the intention behind ICSs is the same as the transfer of public health to us a decade ago, which was to fuse the vast experience of local government in working with communities to improve the delivery of community-based health and social care that can prevent the need for more acute services in the first place. But for this approach to be a success and deliver the synergies we know are needed, we need our NHS colleagues working in an equal partnership with local government. This cannot just involve local government pooling their social care budgets. But the NHS needs to identify what elements of its own community budgets can be pooled to ensure that funding is used strategically and effectively in the true spirit of integration. In particular, I want to focus on how we use the ICS structures for devolved responsibility and accountability for improving health outcomes in our communities. Let's stop the top-down approach that has dominated the healthcare system for too long, and let's genuinely empower our integrated care boards and partnerships to address health inequalities, starting with equal access to healthcare in their neighbourhoods. I will ensure that the findings of the Empower report and the views of our member councils are at the heart of the Hewitt Review. But integration is not the only important policy initiative we have seen progress on. 12 months ago, we hailed the announcement of county deals and look forward to influencing the then promised Levelling Up white paper. When it was unveiled in February, it emphatically shifted the devolution dial towards county areas, with the Levelling Up Secretary confirming he was entering discussions on 9 separate devolution deals. The devolution framework, published within the white paper, was a clear vote of confidence of the local leadership and economic might of our great counties. The government was clear that county and unitary authorities are the building blocks of non-metropolitan devolution, while putting forward proposals for county combined authorities. Of course, all of these words would hold little meaning if they were not followed up by action, and we have seen these proposals now crystallised into the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill. We have witnessed devolution deals agreed this summer in North Yorkshire and in Nottinghamshire and in Derbyshire. And only last week, the Suffolk deal was announced, with Cornwall, Norfolk and the North East deals soon to be completed. Make no mistake, these are landmark deals, the first bona fide county devolution deals agreed since 2015. They are a milestone in county devolution. I do indeed congratulate those areas on their progress. But if we were being honest, I think we would have expected a second round of negotiations underway by now. So today, CCN releases a major new report with EY, which sets out a clear economic argument as to why we need to turbocharge devolution in county areas. The report shows that counties are significant players when it comes to attracting foreign direct investment, which is a key contributor to the national economy. Counties have performed well in attracting FDI over the last 4 years, indeed seeing our share of investment grow over the period. The analysis shows that investment in county areas creates more jobs and supports a more diverse range of private sector businesses than in urban areas. But when adjusted for population, CCN members still trail the major cities and London in terms of FDI. The ratio of investment projects in England's 36 county areas over the past 4 years are half of that of England's major cities, and 7 times fewer per capita than in London. We know that counties are great places to live and work, and our areas contain many of England's economic powerhouse cities. So what is the common denominator holding back our counties in attracting FDI? The major cities and London all have devolution deals, the tools and flexibilities to be as attractive as possible to investors. We know from today's report that investors value a skilled and available workforce, efficient and comprehensive infrastructure, strong business networks, and financial support to locate and invest. We must have parity with these areas in terms of devolved powers and funding. As CCN has long argued, levelling up cannot overlook counties. We must spread opportunity and growth further than the cities. In order to maximise investment across England, we must have all the tools available at our disposal to truly unshackle county areas. This means speeding up the transfer of appropriate LEP functions to all upper tier councils, particularly those that relate to local skills partnerships. I urge the government to begin the next wave of county devolution deals with a commitment to start negotiations with 2/3 of CCN members by the end of this Parliament. It is an ambitious time frame, but we cannot afford to wait. Indeed, nor can the government. The areas I have touched on this morning are just a few of the key agendas we will debate over the coming days. While the outlook is undoubtedly more challenging than it was 12 months ago, the enduring importance of the 36 county and unitary authorities we represent has never been stronger. Whatever the challenges we face, and whoever is in office in Whitehall, you can always rely on CCN to stand up for the interests of its member councils. Most importantly, as we have successfully proved in recent weeks, CCN always advocate in a constructive and pragmatic way, putting forward practical policy solutions. And that's because it is only the county and unitary authorities in our membership who can lead our areas through these difficult times into a more prosperous future. Armed with the right funding, the right powers, and genuine local flexibility, our great counties will rise to the challenge and continue to deliver for our communities. Thank you.
Right, good morning everyone, and welcome to the first session. My name is Matthew Hex. I'm the leader of Suffolk County Council and the CCN spokesperson for economic growth. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome Peter Arnold, who's joined us today. Peter is EY's UK chief economist and leads their UK economic policy team. He has over 20 years' experience in advising both public and private sector clients in the UK and internationally on economic policy impact assessment and much, much more. Peter also leads the work in the UK around FDI and inward investment. So I'm really pleased that Peter has joined us for this session at this year's CCN Conference, which will be launching a new piece of research that we've commissioned with our partners, as I said earlier, EY. At present, I'm sure many of us are all considering how we can continue to best support our local economic growth, making sure that we can continue to not just support our existing local businesses, but actually attract new and exciting businesses into our areas. Our work with EY is intended to support members as they look to grow their local economies, analysing foreign direct investment in their areas, and how best to attract it to drive growth and to create new jobs. It also includes suggestions that CCN will no doubt want to highlight to ministers for how government can support county and unitary councils going forward. So a great pleasure to hand over to Peter.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. So very, very pleased to be here to introduce our Global Britain, Global Counties Attracting Foreign Direct Investment report that launched this morning. Shameless plug, please go on LinkedIn and share and like it and try and really build a bit of media behind it. We're very pleased with this report, and I think it's got some very key findings for all the members here today. I'll skip so what I was going to cover. So it's actually a bit of a tale of two halves, so sort of shameless football pun, but there's two halves and some extra time for questions at the end. I was going to start with looking about the economic outlook. Now that is a little bit doom and gloom, but I just wanted to perhaps play back some of the situation we're in and what the implications of that are, before then being a little bit more optimistic, because despite the doom and gloom and the slightly challenging economic circumstances, there are reasons to believe why the UK as a destination for FDI remains incredibly attractive to investors. That has major implications for county councils and opportunities for county councils. And there are some opportunities to build on despite the slightly challenging economic circumstances. I'll then focus on the report, drawing out some of the key conclusions, the implications for county councils, before having a little bit of QA at the end. So if we start with the kind of economic context, I think it's pretty much an understatement to say these are challenging and volatile circumstances. Whether it's a global energy crisis, political uncertainty, volatility in financial markets, we are pretty much in a bit of a perfect storm. I think if we step back a little bit, there is a tendency for us to be a little bit UK-centric. We think everything is uniquely bad here. We are suffering more than anyone else. And that's not completely accurate. So the global context is important. We have come off a 2-year pandemic at great expense to the government and to the taxpayer. And at some point, that was going to have implications for inflation, for interest rates, and of course, government spending. And the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which has led to heightened energy prices, spikes in oil and gas globally, has fueled this inflationary crisis that we're facing. So this is very much a global issue. Now, I wouldn't say the UK has helped itself over the last few weeks in terms of political stability, but I think the autumn statement was perhaps at least an opportunity to reset some of the narrative around the UK within the world. I think it was a statement of reality, and I would be very surprised if other European countries in particular are not seen to follow suit at some point over the next few months, as the realities of the real cost of protecting domestic economies from these global surging energy prices starts to play out. So what does it all mean? Why are we in the kind of the mess we're in? Well, primarily this is an issue around cost of living. So inflation has surged. It hit 11.1% in October this year. It's over 10.7% across Europe. In the US, it hit just under 9% in the summer and is down a little bit, a global inflationary surge. And why is it so damaging? Well, it's because wages are not keeping up. So currently, average wages in the UK are growing at about 5 to 6% economy-wide. And so we're therefore seeing this significant squeeze on real incomes. People are getting poorer. Their pound in their pocket just buys less. So it's estimated over 2022 and 2023, the average UK household will be 7% worse off in real terms. And that's the largest squeeze on real incomes really since the 70s. The other thing to say about this is it's very unequal in its impact. There's a real equality issue here. It's the poorest houses with the fewest resources that spend a greater proportion of their income on food, on energy, that are going to suffer the most. So this is a real social issue as well as an economic issue. And it's not just inflation, it's also interest rates. So if you look at where the market expected interest rates to peak back in the summer, the market thought interest rates would maybe get to about 3%, but things have moved very quickly. Immediately post the mini-budget, the view was rates would need to get to about 6% to keep inflation under control and to protect sterling. Now, market expectations have fallen since then. The unwinding of some of the measures from the mini-budget, firstly by Jeremy Hunt in his role as Chancellor for Liz Truss, and now with Rishi Sunak as PM and the autumn statement on Thursday, we have seen the market rate of interest rate expectations come down. And indeed, our ISOM Club view is we don't think rates will get that high. We think rates maybe top out at 4%. But that combination of inflation, squeezing real incomes, higher interest rates, it's a question for both businesses and indeed a question for households. It is also going to bear down on affordability. And taking all that together, what does that mean for the economy? So again, things here have moved very quickly. Back in the summer, the Item Club, we were forecasting growth for next year of about 1%. So clearly relatively slow, weak growth, but not a recession. Earlier in October, our forecast was we saw GDP shrinking by about 0.3% calendar year next year, and clearly things have got worse since then. The autumn statement forecast a decline of 1.4% in GDP next year. So a full recession, we're probably already in recession. Now, while the autumn statement was a bit doom and gloom, there are a few assumptions that underpinned it that meant that perhaps things aren't quite as bad or may not play out quite as badly as that forecast suggested. So firstly, they assume interest rates get to 5%, and the Bank of England has signalled that is already, they think that's quite unlikely. So a lower rate of interest, a lower debt burden, there may be some better news around the debt repayments the government has, gives a bit more fiscal freedom on both spending and on tax. They made some quite conservative, small c conservative assumptions around labour participation. We have a labour market challenge here in the country. There are fewer people in work now than there were pre-pandemic, despite 12 months of a fully opened economy. So there's an issue about labour participation. In the OBR forecast, it's assumed that labour market stays particularly tight and labour participation doesn't recover to pre-pandemic levels very quickly. So as times get harder, we might see people returning to work. Or there are things that county councils and central government can do to try and incentivise people to go back to work. So there may be some upside there. And there's some other scenarios that do mean the OBR forecast perhaps a little bit gloomy. But overall, we shouldn't underestimate the situation we're in. It is going to be a challenging economic environment. And that is why I think it's absolutely critical that we start talking about FDI. So in that tougher environment, in a context of higher taxes, a lower government spending or constraints on government spending, there are very few levers that central government and local government can pull to drive investment and to drive jobs into a local area. And FDI is one of those levers. And as I said, we are a little bit negative about the outlook for the UK. But actually, if we step back, the UK is still seen as a very attractive destination for international businesses. So, as it was mentioned in the introduction, I oversee the production of the UK Attractiveness Survey. It's an annual survey that EY conducts where we collate the volume of projects into the UK. We know who's invested here, where they've invested, what they've invested in. But we also ask investors about why they invest here, what attracts them to the UK, and how does it compare to other European markets. So if we look here around what attracts people to the UK, then it does have a number of attractions. We have a very large consumer market, so it's an attractive place to be to serve consumers. We have strong regulatory and legal systems. It's easy to set up a business here, far easier than many countries in Europe. And we do have strong skills base, a strong infrastructure base that makes us attractive. And indeed, when we last asked our investors back in spring this year, so earlier on this year, we said, do you think the UK's attractiveness is going to improve over the next 3 years, or is it going to decline? And we've seen a marked improvement in investors who think the UK's attractiveness is getting better. So yes, immediately post the Brexit vote in 2016, we did see investors say, hang on a minute, what does that mean for my investment? Do I want to be in the UK? And there's no doubt that Brexit makes it more difficult if you're an investor, such as many Japanese investors were, who wants to come to the UK to serve a European market, that it is less attractive. But investment sentiment has recovered. Achieving the TCA deal meant at least we have certainty. So we can see a marked improvement in that kind of net attractiveness of the UK since 2020 when the Brexit deal was signed, and that was still the case earlier on in this year. So despite the economic downturn, the UK remains a great place to invest, and investors want to come and base their businesses here. And this is where we get to this report, the report we've launched this morning. It does really three things. Firstly, it looks at the overall outlook and the overall performance around FDI into the UK. But then we've done some disaggregation. We've looked at how investment flows into the county councils in particular, where it goes, the types of sectors, the jobs it delivers. And from that analysis, we've drawn out some implications for county councils as the steps that they can take to try and drive and increase investment into their areas. So firstly, what's the national picture? So as I said, the UK is a very attractive place to invest. It came second in attracting FDI in 2021, behind only France, and it's really held that position since 2017. Prior to then, we were the #1 destination for FDI into the UK. So the high point in 2019, there are over 1,100 inward investment projects into the UK. Now, that did fall during the pandemic. Perhaps unsurprisingly, in 2020, the number of projects fell to 975. But if you think of the context of that, if you think of global economies being locked down, we think of travel being incredibly difficult, it's perhaps unsurprising that we did see a big drop-off in investment. Now, the good news actually around that drop-off is, from a county council or levelling up perspective, is that the majority of it was in London. So London bore the biggest brunt of the decline in investment. Most of that fall was a reduction in investment, particularly of digital projects into London. If you think about London, very international city, very reliant on international travel, it's again perhaps unsurprising. We saw a partial recovery into 2021, but again, if you didn't think it really wasn't possible to travel really till about November, December last year, you can see why investment remained relatively weak. And when we asked investors at the beginning of 2022 on their outlook for the UK, there was strong sentiment that people wanted to come back and catch up on all those opportunities that have been lost over the last couple of years. So despite the worsening economic circumstances since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, sentiment at the beginning of the year was incredibly positive. So while I think 2022, we perhaps won't get back to 2019 levels, I do expect we'll have another strong recovery on what we saw in 2021. The other characteristic of FDI into the UK is it tends to be more job intensive than what we see in our European neighbours. So if you look at jobs per project, the UK got around 68 jobs per project, and that compares pretty favourably to France and Germany. The UK also attracts more new projects as opposed to expansion projects, and these new projects tend to be bigger, they tend to be new facilities rather than just adding on or reinvesting in an existing facility. So a pretty positive inward investment story at the UK aggregate. Yes, there are some global headwinds that will make this year a little bit challenging, but overall we do expect a little bit of a bounce back. And what does that then mean for county councils? Well, actually, on a volume basis, the County Councils network and the members who sit in the County Councils network do pretty well. So 761 inward investment projects since 2018 into the CCN areas. And that's higher than unitaries and higher than the metropolitan councils, although clearly somewhere behind London. But there is a but here. So yes, in terms of total volume, more projects are attracted. But when it comes to projects adjusted for population, you can see you lag a little bit. So in line with unitaries and a little bit below metro areas and well below London. And that kind of makes sense if you think the metro areas have that critical mass of population, of business density, that is more attractive. So there's clearly some work for the CCNs to do here. In terms of the geographic coverage, we tend to see more projects in the southeast and the Midlands, but again, that largely reflects greater population density rather than there being any really disproportionate strong performers across the area. Uniformly, CCNs do pretty well in attracting investment. And where does that investment come from? So as with the rest of the country, the largest single investor is the US. So it accounts for about 26% of investment. So when thinking about your country strategy, the US always #1 up there at the list. If you then combined all the EU countries, they would account for a slightly larger share than the US, with the important ones being Germany, being the Netherlands, and then we go down to France, and actually Ireland's quite an important investor as well. But a couple of other points to make. In terms of the diversity of countries that invest in CCN areas, actually it's more diverse than the national average. So that's a good thing. On one hand, it means there's plenty of countries to go out and target and to play with. On the other hand, there is a risk that there's too much diversity and how do you focus in that context? So something to think about for your area, where are you really going to focus on your efforts from the kind of international perspective? And then maybe just one area to look at in terms of attracting investment from India, which is of growing importance in inward investment projects into the UK. CCNs lag a little bit in gaining India's share. So that, to me, could be a major growth opportunity for the areas. And then from a sector perspective, how do CCNs perform? What are the key sectors that invest in CCN areas? Well, digital is the largest single sector in terms of projects, and indeed it's the largest single sector in terms of projects for the UK as a whole. Digital investment has been the powerhouse of inward investment into the UK. We have the largest share across Europe. We're clearly the European leader when it comes to digital sectors. And so it should be an area of focus for CCNs. But you probably have a little bit of a disadvantage. It does tend to be quite concentrated in major urban areas. But there are some sectors where you have a clear comparative advantage. So agri-food being one where you have a clear lead over some of the areas. Pharmaceuticals and health and social work, a real opportunity. So thinking about some of the characteristics, perhaps a little bit more land, space for larger facilities, this gives you some opportunities in some of those bigger investments, some of the sectors that need that extra space, whether it's for laboratories, whether it's for factories, or whether it's logistical facilities. Thinking through the comparative advantage that you have in your area does lead to where your sectorial focus may be. But some good news, particularly if we're looking at high value add sectors, life sciences, pharmaceuticals, very much at that area, the sweet spot. And then from a jobs perspective, so I said already that the UK does better than our European neighbours in terms of jobs, generating jobs per project. And actually CCNs do well here as well. You beat the kind of the UK average in terms of, this is since 2018, on average a job, each project generated about 83 jobs. So these projects are pretty job dense. So it is an opportunity for inward investment and local economic generation. FDI does provide that opportunity. And as I mentioned at the beginning, given the constraints on spending and the limits on other levers for economic development, then FDI does provide that leader to drive economic growth into the local economy. And so overall, since 2018, 40,000 jobs have been created across the CCN network areas as a consequence of FDI. So it's a major jobs contributor, new jobs contributor, and we know those jobs tend to be higher value add, higher productivity, and therefore incremental to the local economies and drive extra growth. And we did a little bit of analysis on relative performance across the CCNs. I'm not going to name any names, really, but just trying to reflect on where do we see perhaps stronger performance and what lessons can we take from that if we're as a CCN member. So if we look at the top 10 authorities that attracted inward investment, the two real themes strike out. So firstly, around skills. So the top 10 areas had around 40% of their population who had level 4 qualifications or more. So they're kind of higher educated and beyond. And that compares to 35% as average. So clearly skills are one of the key elements in attracting FDI. Businesses come where the people are, where the skills are. So that as a focus for a development strategy is probably the number one thing to think about. And then business networks. Business networks are critical. Businesses also want to be where other businesses are. They want to be there for access to talent, yes, but also for access to just networks, access to supply chains, the ability to integrate into a local economy. Businesses of the same sector are often clustered together. It's a well-known agglomeration phenomenon. And so unsurprisingly, the top 10 CCN areas had far more business density than the average. So roughly around 48 businesses per capita compared to that 37 figure for the average. So that business density. So there's not always a huge amount you can do about that, but thinking around the ecosystem you create for business startups and new businesses, if you can create those business parks where places locate, that does attract, that does act as a magnet and acts particularly for inward investment. The other thing we ask our investors, as I mentioned, is why come here? Why do you come to the UK? And what drives your choice of region? And fundamentally, almost reflecting what I've just commented on, the two most important drivers are always skills and infrastructure, the basics, if you like. So this shows you availability of local workforce and then labour costs. So a combination around 50% of investors is either the cost or the availability of worker that informs their location decision. And we've got strength of transport infrastructure at the bottom here. Actually, there's quality of digital infrastructure that's scored pretty highly. You combine those two together, and again, infrastructure goes up the list. But skills and infrastructure, if you like, the basics. That's why businesses choose where to invest. However, the other thing, if you like, the kind of the secret sauce or what makes a business really stick is the ability for local authorities and the ability of new businesses to sort of integrate into the local community. So what businesses want, they want to understand the strength of business networks locally, and they need support in navigating the various supports, incentives, R&D tax breaks that are available, and the local authorities are in great position to do that. So think about your role as facilitating a new business coming into the area, integrate into local business networks, integrate into local labour markets, and also help them navigate all the rules and regulations and processes that they need to do to get through. FDI shouldn't be seen as a transaction. Once an investment is landed, you move away. It should be very much seen as a relationship that starts right when you have that first conversation to when the shovels are in the ground, and even when the business is up and running. You need to maintain that relationship, and that is the best way, and that's what our investors say they really want from us. So what are the delivery models? So we looked at the different delivery models that there are for local authorities, regional authorities to deliver inward investment. And there's three broad models that we've observed. The first one is partnership via the LEPs, the existing LEP structure. The LEPs have the advantage of scale, of resources, of specific skills and capabilities, particularly in attracting FDI. So that's an option if that one works for you. We have seen increasingly in-house delivery by councils. That has the advantage, if you like, of local knowledge and control. The local council will know more about their local area, their local assets, the local capabilities, the local sources of comparative advantage than perhaps you'll know at a kind of a larger LEP-type organisation. And finally, we've seen people almost outsource capability to these investment promotion agencies, where you outsource a company who will come in and help drive. And again, they bring skills and experience. You do need to bridge that local knowledge gap. But in some respects, it kind of doesn't really matter how you seek to deliver FDI. What matters is the focus, and you bring the right partners. So you engage with DIT, you take advantage of what central government can provide in terms of skills and resource and capability and information and data. You bring in other partners, so local chambers of commerce, local businesses. So you get the full set of partners at the table when you go out to market here. And then, of course, the most important people are actually the foreign investors themselves. So that interaction, that support and engagement with those foreign investors is critical, not just for existing investors, but also thinking about how you go out and attract new investors. So where are you having the opportunity to get face time with those new investors? A really critical part. So what are we suggesting you do? What are our kind of recommendations or sort of policy implications, if you like, from the analysis we've undertaken in this report? So first thing is adopting a strategic approach to investment. And by strategic, we mean be proactive. So work out what it is you want to achieve, your local capabilities, what are you trying to target, and think about that both in terms of a short-term and a long-term strategy for economic development of your area. Then data and information. This is critical. In order to have the best offer, in order to be very clear on your value proposition to investors, you really need to understand your local economy and have as much information on the local economy as possible, the key sectors, the key assets that are available, the labour force, the quality of skills, and so on. There's There's implications for your other investment strategies. So you have other policy levers, whether it's investment in infrastructure, whether it's your educational programs. So using them and thinking about those as additional tools to support the inward investment strategy. So I said infrastructure critically important. Are there some road junctions that could be accelerated to open up some land that could be then developed to become a business park, for example? So joined up government, integrated government, and thinking about it holistically is really important. And then finally, capacity and capability. And this is really important. So you do need to invest in both the capability and the capacity within the CCNs in order to do this. Now, that is expensive, but I would argue that the payback could be pretty significant. If you get one or two people, a few resources focused on this, and they start bringing investment in, then you'll see the impact and benefit for your area. And then bringing all of that together to the delivery model. So what are we saying that the things you need to do are? So firstly, a clearly defined operating model for delivering inward investment. So it doesn't matter which structure you choose, whether it's with the LEP or whether it's in-house, you at least know how you're going to go to market and what you're going to do. You need a clear, differentiated value proposition based on data. So why should an investor come to you? What is it that's an opportunity for them to come here? What's the kind of, if you like, the USP of your area that will bring them there? And finally, that capacity and capability to deliver. This will require some investment. It will require resources. It will require investment in technology and tools and so on. But I think the payback of it is potentially incredibly significant when you look at some of the data around the jobs delivered and the sectors that we see inward investment land in. So thank you very much. I was going to leave it there. Those are the highlights of our report, and I think we've got a bit of time for any questions from the audience. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you, Peter. That was very interesting, very informative. We've got questions. Just to remind everyone, we do have an app. You can put questions in through the app. Some have come in as well, and we'll take them across the room as well. So if you've got a question, if you put your hand up, a mic should appear, I believe. We have one at the back there. Martin. I think give it a go. The mic's behind you, Martin.
Maybe you can hear me better with the mic, but it doesn't seem to work. Okay. Martin Tate, Buckinghamshire Council. Very interesting presentation. Two quick questions. One is, about a third of CCN members are now unitaries. So where do we fit into your categorisation? Are we CCN or are we unitaries? Question mark. And secondly, I was quite interested in the fact that you get higher workforce percentages in county areas. Because a lot of my experience is the bids we get in are for big sheds, data centres, which quite frankly have very few employees but take up an awful lot of land, whereas actually in the urban areas you tend to get a lot of high intellectual capital and a lot more, if you like, value per employee. So I was quite interested in the rationale behind your analysis, and is it quite factually incorrect that counties get a disproportionate share of big sheds, low employment? Thank you.
Okay, so I mean, the first question around how have we defined it, we have taken the if you like, the CCN members and defined them as that CCN areas, and then, you know, if you didn't fall into that, we've either categorised it as unitaries. So appreciate there is some overlap, but it is basically we based it on the membership. Perhaps I should explain around how we've done the actual analysis. So we have what we call the Investment Monitor database. Each year, EY, we go out and we collate based on news reports the number of inward investment projects, and we follow up those news reports in about 70%, 80% of times. We do the due diligence to make sure that those announcements are accurate. And then that gives us the number of projects that we record each year. And when we look at those projects, we record the area where they were landed, we record the country of origin, we have the company, we'll have the sector they're in, and we'll have a view as to the type of activity. Is it a sales or marketing function? Is it a head office? Is it a manufacturing facility? And so on. So given the verification, we're reasonably confident in the number of the number of projects. When it comes to jobs, that's a little bit more difficult. So what we take is jobs announced. So they'll say this facility will create this amount of jobs. We don't have the information to go and sort of verify and say, you know, were they delivered and so on. I mean, I think the point around, you asked around what we see for CCNs, I think there probably may be a trade-off between larger, you know, a logistics hub that might employ a lot of people, but, you know, arguably may not be as high value add as a smaller investment in a tech company in a city centre. So there are some trade-offs with jobs and value, accept that. But, you know, ultimately it comes down to tailoring and thinking around the needs of the area, and thinking even in that context, what are the kind of the focus areas, the skills base that enables you to target your own inward investment activity to ensure you maximise the value of inward investment into your business. So, you know, in an area of high unemployment, then actually a logistics facility that provides lots of low-skilled jobs may be a kind of a great opportunity for the people in your area. But, you know, it does very much a tailored solution, thinking around the specific needs of the area, and perhaps from an economic development plan, what are the challenges the area faces.
Okay, thank you. If you put your hand up if you have a question, and I'll take some off the app and some off the room. So I'll take one off the app. How should councils interface with DFT? They often control first UK-wide inquiries.
To DFT or UKTI, do you mean?
Well, it's got DIT.
DIT.
Sorry.
So, I mean, I think that engagement with DIT is critical. So, and perhaps if I sort of take a step back, the kind of reflection where DIT has a responsibility, obviously, for the country as a whole, and so therefore it doesn't necessarily have the same objectives that the county councils will have. Their objective is to bring investment into the UK. They're less worried around where it lands, candidly. Where I've seen investment promotion agencies do really well is where they have that kind of focused regional lens. So if you look across the rest of the UK, Scotland, for example, is able to punch above its weight when it comes to attracting FDI because it has a dedicated Scottish agency that's just focused at bringing on investment into Scotland. It has the resources there, it has a distinct Scottish offer, and that gives it a real advantage. Across England, probably Manchester then does next well because it has that sort of brand. And so I think, yes, engagement with DIT is really important because they are often the gate into which investors first sort of land, if you like, but you need to then have that very specific, clear local offer that then says, right, I'm coming to the UK, where should I go? Well, here's my county offer. So I think that engagement with the DIT, regular engagement with the DIT, letting them know what your capabilities and assets are, what the opportunities are, gives them the maximum amount of information so that they can then provide the best service to investors and give them that kind of regional flavour, which perhaps otherwise they're kind of a little bit more agnostic around the investment actually goes.
Okay, thank you. I haven't got any other hands up, but just shout if you've got anything. So the next one on the app is, how can councils maintain the investment confidence of existing businesses as we head into recession? Any thoughts on that?
Yes, and I think this is a challenge, and it applies both, I think, to domestic businesses as well as foreignly owned businesses. I mean, I guess one thing that all businesses need is certainty, and we've had very little of that. So I think to the extent you can provide certainty of local decisions, whether it's around housing developments, whether it's around transport improvements, whether it's around social care policies, getting that certainty as much as possible is really quite critical. And then going out and talk to businesses, understanding their concerns and seeing what support you can provide or signal or even just facilitate to help those businesses survive. So I think it's that, if you like, as much certainty as possible to the extent that you can, and you have the levers under your control, and we can't control what happens in Westminster, but also that kind of communication, lines of communication, understand the challenges in the local environment and see what you can do to alleviate them or support businesses through this challenging next 12 months or so.
Everyone on the floor.
Great presentation. I'm Alan White from Staffordshire. If you were to come back here 2 years from today, from now, what one thing would you change today to improve the FDI into county areas?
Oh, that's a very good question. What's the one thing I would change? I mean, I think perhaps ignore the kind of macro challenges around that because there's very little that we can do to influence that. So, but I think that that clear, proactive, strategic focus on what each county wants to do. So having that strategy in place, regardless of the operating model, but saying, in my area, we have capability in life sciences, we've got this block of land that's available for development, and then let's have a kind of a roadmap as to how we're going to go on to deliver that. So if everyone walked away and sort of dusted down their investment plans and had that clear roadmap, then that's probably where I would start. And then hopefully 2 years from now, we'd start seeing some kind of return on the investment made in that exercise.
Thank you. Another one here. Attracting new and expanding existing FDI is a highly skilled area. What is your assessment of the capacity and capability of councils to actually do this successfully, and where can they go to get the support needed?
I mean, so clearly that will vary depending on the people you have in place, the resources you have in order to undertake that type of activity. It is a skilled task. It does require investment. And if you don't have the resources to make that investment, it's going to be challenging. But there is support available. So we've talked about DIT. DIT has a lot of resources. It has information around both investors. It has information around opportunities. So engaging with DIT and other central government departments, so BEIS. We saw in the Sunday press, for those who saw, that there's some suggestion that the industrial strategy may be rebooted. So there may be some more resources coming via BEIS as well as coming via DOT. So engagement with DIT, there's some support there. With the LEPS networks, again, LEPS are probably more likely to have people in place who specialise in bringing inward investment in and attracting inward investment in, so using those resources as well. So I think there are routes to go. And then thinking through that, the power of other partners, so local business networks would be the other area, so the local chambers of commerce and so on, so integration with them. The councils, even with minimal resources, can play a facilitation role, a convening role in bringing people together. And even if that's the starting point, that's probably better than doing nothing.
Okay, we've got a couple of questions around LEPs. So I'll just if we bring them together. With the future of LEPs uncertain, what should CCN members be doing to ensure the future of FDI? And is it time now to recalibrate LEPs and let their roles change and not wait for government?
Again, I mean, it probably need an expert in local government reform for that. I mean, I think perhaps LEPs are a great example of the challenges I think we've all faced over the last 10, 15 years, as there's been multiple reorganisations of various regional agencies that are all there trying to do the same thing. Do LEPs need to be reformed? How should they be reformed? I think we do need regional bodies that perhaps think at a level, I would argue above the county council level, at more regionally, to get some economies of scale. There does something need to be in place. But I think in the absence of any clear guidance from government as to what's going to replace LEPs, then I think county councils probably have to start taking on that responsibility for their own vision of how they want their area to develop, and perhaps be prepared to reach out to neighbouring counties and other local authorities and think, well, where can we cooperate to bring greater than the sum of its parts? So, particularly on things like skills programs or infrastructure programs, some kind of cooperation, pooling budgets, for example, would make sense. I mean, one of the areas we've discussed is around retrofitting of homes. And each local authorities have their own plans for how they're going to go and retrofit homes and housing. If you start getting combinations of county councils who suddenly have much bigger budgets, suddenly have much bigger spending power and probably much bigger negotiation power, then you may start seeing there's big scale advantages. So I think that would be another area to look at, the cooperation between neighbouring councils to maximise resourcing and capability.
Okay, we've got one last question in our slot with time, not much time. We want to engage, councils will need to prioritise their activities given the reduced resources that they can expect in the coming years. What one single thing should they focus on to attract inward investment, and what should that be?
So I've touched on it probably a couple of times, and in the graphic around the last chart, the last slide we showed really was that value proposition. So really understanding the value proposition of the area, that requires a little bit of work. So get the data together, understand the data, but what is the reason why an investor would want to come to your area? What is it you're offering in terms of assets and capabilities and opportunity? And if you really understand that, you can then articulate that to investors, and I think that would be the priority.
Okay, well, can I just, on behalf of everyone, thank you very much for joining us today, and thank you for presenting the report in a very informative session. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think Martin, if you go this one, yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, perfect. And then, hey, are you okay in that one? That's great, brilliant. Good morning. I'm Rob Turner. I'm from Grant Thornton, and I have the privilege of chairing this next conversation around county devolution. I will introduce our illustrious panel shortly, but devolution is widely recognised by politicians and policymakers alike as a powerful tool for enhancing decision making, driving economic growth and ultimately improving people's lives. As Tim said in his opening remarks, the focus on county deals was an acknowledgement by government of that confidence they have in the local leadership you all can provide in your places. It was an acknowledgement of the economic importance of your places, and we've just heard that in the last session, around driving future growth. It was encouraging to see the new Prime Minister's commitment to levelling up. That, coupled with the comments made last week by the Chancellor, show that devolution is going to remain a key strategic priority for the UK government. County authorities are rightly being put at the heart of this agenda, and over the last 18 months at Grant Thornton, we've been working closely with CCN and many of the 9 leading authorities identified in the white paper to try and understand a bit more around the potential that county authorities can offer in the devolution space. And that is clear. We've seen the opportunities that deals present. We've seen the potential to drive growth and change, but we've also seen some of the challenges in getting the deals to the point in which they can be signed. And so the purpose of this session is not to hear from me, but is actually to slightly pull back the curtain and to share reflections and lessons from those who've been at the heart of the deal-making process over the previous 9 months. And I'm delighted to be joined by Kate Canally, Chief Executive of Cornwall Council, Councillor Ben Bradley MP, Leader of Nottinghamshire County Council, Councillor Andrew Proctor, Leader of Norfolk County Council, and Councillor Martin Hill, Leader of Lincolnshire County Council and CCN spokesperson for devolution. And as we discuss as a panel the issues around devolution, I'd love to hear and see some of your thoughts and reflections. So please do be using the app. Put questions, comments in. I will keep an eye on those as we progress through the conversation. But as we start, Martin, let me come to you first. Devolution's been around since the late 90s. Obviously, Lincolnshire was very close to signing a deal back in 2016. So you've been close to it. But what is different about the devolution framework set out in the Levelling Up White Paper?
Thank you. Thank you. I think what hasn't changed is probably the first place to start. And government has been very consistent that they need a single point of contact for all these devolution deals ever since they were created after the Scottish referendum. And they've also been very consistent. They want that individual to be a directly elected individual. And that's been the case all along. You don't have to have a directly elected individual, but frankly, when you look at the detail, if you want a level 3, which is the one I think most people would want, you've got to accept that that is the price to be paid. It is a price to be paid, because personally I think most of us in this room would probably think, well, what's wrong with council leaders? You know, a big council, running big councils, why can't they be it? But that's what the government is saying. And my view is it's probably gone too far now that the momentum, we're actually more and more deals, which we've heard about, are coming along. So I don't think there's any chance now that there will be a change. Whatever government comes in, I think the view is that the government wants to talk to 40 or so mayors, or whatever you want to call them, to do that. And as you said, we nearly got to the stage of having a deal, and I think the problem in the past was the governance. And it wasn't arguments about governance locally, it was governance models imposed on areas by government, and basically they were trying, once they'd done their urban deals, they were trying to sort of impose an urban model, where typically you have in London and Manchester, you have upper tier authorities of a similar size, all unitaries, they all come together and they're the same size, they're doing the same roles. That clearly is more difficult in rural areas, and particularly in rural areas which have which are two-tier. So in our particular case, I mean, I could be sitting here, we could have had a devolution deal years ago, actually, and where it fell down was in terms of the governance, and the government at the time insisted that every council in that area had to have one vote, every single council. So the county council in Lincolnshire, population of 750 million, £1 billion budget, one vote. Small district council, 80,000 population, several million budget, one vote. And we actually went through an extensive consultation exercise with the public, and there was, acceptance of, yes, we think this devolution's a good idea. Yeah, okay, we're not sure about this mayor business, but actually if that means more prosperity for our area, great, we'll go with that. And then the next question was, well, that's great. So if having this mayor, presumably you at county council and district council, you won't be here anymore, will you? No. And what was proposed at the time was a new local authority, a mayoral combined authority, county council, district council. And I think most of the public said, well, that's ridiculous. So at the 11th hour, the county council, having seen the consultation, we actually pulled out, so which did cause some frustration, I have to say, at the time, and one of the district did as well. Although it's very frustrating to watch other areas now getting these deals, I don't for 1 second regret that decision, because next door in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, they went with that model, and I won't say too much about it, but I think it's probably does prove that I don't think that really works when you get unequal partners around the same table. So what's changed now is I think the government has accepted that the governance needs to be a lot more flexible to reflect the different geographies. So now we have got a situation where, you know, there's been various iterations. We went through a you've got to go unitary situation, which caused a lot of stress, as you can imagine. But now we're in the situation that the deals are only going to be with upper tier areas. Having said that, they have a duty to make sure they cooperate and bring other district councils and businesses in with them, and there's more flexibility, and there is some nuances which I'm sure Kate will talk about in terms of what this directly elected thing should look like. So there is more flexibility in that, which is great, because I think all of us in this room in our areas could actually come with a single point of contact. We could provide the government with that single point of contact. They don't need to be directly elected, but those are the rules of the game, and I think those are the rules that are going to stay. So I think that greater flexibility, and I think the other bonus, and CCN have done a lot of work on this, to make sure the geographies make sense. So in my particular area, there's the county council and 2 small unitaries on the Humber Bank. That is the geography which everybody agrees as well. So I think there's some clarity around big geographies, and there's also some clarity around that really you don't want to make this too complicated, too many players in there, because what it's all about is the government investing in areas, but also then allowing the councils to actually run the services, which is what we do. So I think, in a summary, that we've made good progress, and I think we can work with what the government's now doing, and it's really great that some areas, you know, certainly Ben's area, are now going ahead, and it's really good for all of us.
Brilliant, thank you, Martin. Kate, let me come to you. You did get a deal signed in 2015. You've been very busy negotiating a deal for 2022, and obviously positive announcement from the Chancellor in that sense. What's been different now for Cornwall?
Well, I think I want to start off by saying what are the similarities. So I think that in 2015, we have, as a place, a clear sense of what our opportunities and our risks are. And we wanted to have a devolution deal that enabled us to shape public service reform in order to influence the costs of delivering public services in Cornwall. And we wanted to have a deal which enabled us to find ways in which that we could grow the prosperity of Cornwall, so that we could try and get the scales better to balance. And we had an enabling deal that started to set out new ways of working in terms of providing that place leadership. And I'd like to think that Cornwall, through its first deal, as being the place that had a rural devolution deal without a mayor, covering a functional economic area, has set a model which has led to the commitment in terms of county deals kind of going forwards, because we weren't a metropolitan combined authority area. We had a devolution deal, didn't have as many powers as what we saw in Greater Manchester or in West Midlands, but I think that we built a track record of delivery which has given confidence and led to the county deals offer that is now in place through the Levelling Up White Paper. The other similarity, of course, is that the people of Cornwall want more say and more control over matters that face and shape our communities. And that is the same in 2022 as it was in 2015. And the survey work that was done to shape the devolution framework continue to show that people in Cornwall want a greater say. So we see very much devolution as being a process and not an event. And actually there are many in Cornwall that will say that a level 3 deal isn't really true devolution and it should go further. But actually I think that we're in a space of wanting to take the opportunities that are available to us to take greater control over the way within which that decisions are being made. I think, we had a period of time where we had a proposition for where we wanted to go on our 2015 deal, during the time of 2018 to 2021. But there are, you have to take your moment. And actually, the government was not in a place to be able to do devolution deals, whereas now there is a clear national framework. It is our time and our moment to step forward and to be able to go and secure those greater powers into the future. So I think it's about being clear locally what you want to try and achieve and going in clear about that ambition. It's about picking your moment around finding the time where you can leverage the most amount of influence. And I think that that's where we are now in 2022. What's different, I suppose, within Cornwall is that we've had that enabling deal. A level 2 deal was something that conferred no additional opportunity from that which we had in 2015. So that has led the authority to have to consider, actually, if we want that further devolution, what that trade-off is and what that opportunity is that comes with that directly elected mayor leader. And that's a very live debate at the moment in Cornwall. And I think that the sooner that we can get the kind of negotiated deal out there to begin that conversation with residents and with businesses and communities, the better.
Brilliant, thank you, Kate. Ben, I'm going to come to you now. East Midlands was successful in getting the first mayoral combined county authority deal prepared. Give us a bit of insight into what it was like negotiating with government. Any sort of tidbits you can share with us in the room on that?
Sure. It was a challenge, for the record. I think we were really pleased to kind of go first. As Martin was saying, government set this framework as to this is what you need to do if you're going to get X. And some people, I think, decided to go and try and negotiate with that with government. Government weren't keen to hear it. We just kind of focused on the outcomes and said, look, if we want to play in the Premier League in that sense, we need to go and accept those rules and take our moment, as Kate described. So we wanted to get on with it. I think we benefited in the summer, oddly, perhaps benefited from the chaos nationally in that our deadline was October. But when Greg Clark became Secretary of State, he was very keen to get it done before the change of leadership. I think we've probably benefited from that, particularly financially, because it meant, sometimes I think you can shorten the conversation and you don't necessarily lose anything, you just get on with it and you all have to focus mind. It was a very busy period. But we managed to tie down the finances in particular, which I think if we were negotiating those numbers now, that might be a different conversation. So I think it's probably positive that we managed to do that. But yes, we managed to tie down, as I say, £1.14 billion gain share, which I think is a kind of quantum is on the top end of what people have managed to achieve historically. And also, because the deal was an accelerated process, what we didn't have time to do was to get into the off-framework kind of conversation. We really wanted, part of the reason to go first was to be able to be that pilot. I think government's looking at places like Cornwall, rural kind of structures, like the East Midlands, complicated two-tier governance and unitary cities, places where it's almost a conversation about, if you can do devolution and find a framework in these places, you can do it anywhere. So we were keen to pilot different ways of doing things, particularly around public sector reform as well, and how we could deliver services better, devolve different parts of funding, which we've had to kind of agree to come back to. But pleased to pin it down, and I think starting to work through, we've got APS consultation now, and starting to work through, in our own mind, some of the strategies and opportunities of what we can deliver.
Excellent. Andrew, let me come to you. Has it been similar in Norfolk? Particularly, I guess people would be interested in how you've managed to involve district colleagues in the process, and actually what it's been like negotiating as that kind of lead authority that Martin alluded to in his opening remarks.
Well, part of that, Rob, is actually government understanding. This is central government from their perspective, but local government does actually work somewhat differently. And the sort of nuances of local government are really important to us, and I don't think they're always particularly well understood by central government. So putting that part aside about the understanding, where we started from in 2021 was really the initial expression of interest. Now that sort of led to quite a fair bit of detailed work thinking, well, what have we got to offer from Norfolk's perspective as a functional economic area? We'd set out our own priorities, agreed by everybody, including all the district councils, saying this is what we want to do. So fine, so roll that forward a few months, then you get to the stage, well, here's the framework. So the framework didn't necessarily relate to what was in the priorities. So you then get the dilemma of, well, is this actually worth doing? Just roll back a bit towards the district council side. Priorities agreed, yes, we got that down. We got an infrastructure plan for Norfolk as well, so all those sort of things were agreed. But the fixation during the course of the discussion was always around the governance. What we want, districts, was a mayoral combined authority. Well, that wasn't really on offer. Legally, it may have been attainable, but it certainly wasn't on offer. So that became the focus of really what was going on, as opposed to the detail of negotiation. And then you get to the other aspect of negotiation. What does the deal text actually mean? What is it? Is it a contract? Is it a deal? It actually is a policy document more than anything else. I don't know about yours, Ben, but I think ours has probably reached its about 23rd iteration in terms of what's in there. Maybe a little bit of exaggeration, but certainly a high number of iterations. And where we've got to in terms of discussions, which have been wider than just the district councils, is also with the Norfolk Public Sector Leaders Board members, health, the police, the voluntary sector particularly, is a bit of a fixation now on let's see the deal text. And this is where, as I go back to what's the lack of understanding. Now that deal text is the policy document, but we can't actually show it to anybody at the moment. So that becomes the other fixation. You move on from let's have a mayoral combined authority, no you can't, to now can we see the deal text, no you can't. Even though that deal text can be summarised in probably about 3 or 4 sessions. We did something like that on Friday last week, setting out the benefits of the deal and then looking at the implications. In terms of the benefits, I think that came out to 8 points. The implications came out to 2. So you see where the dilemma around this, and you see where some of the fixations are, but I'd like to think that where we go from now is recognising that that train has left the station, if you like, in terms of the governance. Yeah. This is where we're moving on to.
Yeah. And Andrew, if I could stick with you, can you give us some insights into how discussions around a mayor or a directly elected leader played out locally? Because I'm conscious that will be a big sort of consideration for lots of people in this room. Tell us how that worked out in Norfolk.
Well, I suppose the thing to be aware of there, Rob, is thinking of this and not getting ourselves in a political bubble. Because if we see it just as this bit affecting us from a political point of view, that doesn't really help anybody at all. But the point of that really, until you get to the stage you've got something to offer, you are still in that political bubble. And getting the point through about change. If anything like this is going to happen, it does require change. And I appreciate other people will say, well, no, we're not prepared to make that change. It's not worth it. But the decision needs to be taken about, if we're going to go down that route of change, there will be change in terms of governance. That's the first thing. And the second element of that really is how we can make that work across the functional economic area of Norfolk, but also how that plays out into the public domain. Now, some people think, well, does it really matter? Does it really matter whether there's a directly elected leader of Norfolk County Council? Does it really matter if there's a mayor? Well, some people get fixated again, sorry about the fixated word, but on titles in a situation like this. So I think perhaps where it needs to go now is just the clarity of what is actually on offer in this situation, recognising that to turn it down would be not a particularly good move, but equally from the public point of view, demonstrating the benefits that will accrue as time goes on.
Yeah, thank you. Kate, you're a chief executive. What does having a directly elected leader mean for you operationally in a county authority, and what are some of the considerations you've been working through?
Well, I suppose I don't know yet. We'll see what that brings. But of course, it's right that we start thinking about it. And I suppose one of the things noticing around how these deals are progressing is that there's a variety of kind of different models that are opening up from, in Ben's neck of the woods, it will be a county combined authority that a directly elected mayor sits over to, in Norfolk, a directly elected leader of a county council, and in Cornwall's case, and I think it will be the first example, which will be a directly elected leader, mayor of a large unitary council. So that set of relationships will look different in different places. So what are the things that are on my mind? Well, on one level, you could think, well, it won't be all that different, will it? I mean, the leader will be replaced by a directly elected mayor, but I think that would be a naive position for me to be taking in respect to this. Because, of course, the directly elected mayor will come from having been voted by a large electorate, and that will give a boldness to that policy agenda. And that's going to be really interesting. So I think, first of all, it's going to be really important about the development of manifestos, about working alongside potential candidates and making sure that the things that are being put forward are deliverable. And that actually they are realistic, because I will want the directly elected mayor to succeed, and I hope that the directly elected mayor will want me and my team to succeed. So doing some of that early work, first of all, to make sure that that boldness that comes with that position is deliverable is something that is on my mind. I think as well, the work that is necessary with each of the deals in terms of setting out your accountability framework also gives the opportunity to take a look, learn from other places, but also to reflect on the political culture of your own organisation. So Cornwall's motto is on and ag all, which means one and all. There is some concern that one and all will be replaced with one over all. And I think that within the context of Cornwall Council, it's about understanding our political culture, thinking about the ways within which that the authority currently does its work, and involving our Constitution and Governance Committee, the Independent Remuneration Panel, taking a look at the changes that need to be made in the Constitution, members' schemes of allowances, to make sure that before that election takes place, that it's something that we think is going to work for Cornwall. And there's learning that we can take, whether it's from your neighbours in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, but equally, we have to hold a mirror up within our own authorities at the moment, that there are times that governance arrangements can go wrong, and we've got improvement boards taking place in places that haven't got directly elected mayors as well. So, paying attention to that and having enough time before the election to get that right, I think, is important, which is why we're looking at a May 24 election. And I think the other bit that's on my mind too is the directly elected mayor, of course, has a very particular role to be playing, but so do the other 87 councillors that are there in the authority, and getting that clear understanding about how we're supporting those 87 councillors to be cabinet members in their division, what sits at a mayor level, how do we support that local decision making is key. But I hope very much that, the kind of my relationship that I will build as the chief exec with directly elected mayor has all of those principles of good officer-member relationships, about shared understanding, mutuality, making sure that we got the right policy advice. I'm thinking about and will want to explore about those functions that are reserved functions for the mayor. What does that mean for officer structures? What sits in a mayoral office? What do schemes of delegation look like? And I think that starting as the deal comes out, beginning that work on thinking about, well, what does this mean for decision making in the authority, and having the right people involved, our monitoring officer, our constitutional lawyer, our strategy team, working across with the political life of the council is going to be key to try and get that right, because every council is different. So know your culture, know what you value, what you want to protect, as you start to go into this, so that the mayor, when elected, comes in the context of your culture, not of something that is just shaped by a single individual.
Thank you, Kate. Martin, you're at a slightly earlier stage. Have the considerations been similar, different in Lincolnshire? Where's the sort of current thinking around?
Well, it's been very frustrating for us because everybody's agreed on the geography. Everybody's accepting. All the councils have said, yeah, we're not particularly keen on the mayor, but if that's the price you're going to pay, we're all up for that. And we're all pretty agreed on the what as well. So you could say, well, actually easy peasy, isn't it? But I think it all comes back to the governance. And obviously very disappointed last time when we jealously watched Ben drive forward with his deal and we weren't included. So I think there's what was going on there, I think, and when we got some feedback from why weren't we on the list. First of all, there was talk of consensus. You need to do more work on consensus. So the first thing there, I think, is we've got 11 MPs in our area. Majority understand that they've got to have a mayor, but there is a significant vociferous minority who don't want a mayor because they see a mayor as a threat to them. You know, it's not, you know, we see it as, you know, we can manage it, we believe, as councillors, but they see it, so they're very resistant. So the noises in Whitehall, we haven't got a situation where I think Ben got all the MPs, all his colleagues together, and I think other areas did the same. We're not in that position. So there's work to do on some of those, and also there was talk of more clarity, although we're clear as the upper tier 3 that we know what we're asking for, and we've done a lot of work working with Whitehall to give them the bid that they would like to see. So again, there's some more work to do, and then there's a lot of noises about the two-tier world, and I think noises in Whitehall, and so I think government's just felt a little bit unsure whether there is a genuine consensus, and there was also a difference of view, I suppose I could put it, in terms of the geography that locally we felt was right for historic Lincolnshire. I think there were some in Whitehall who had a different geography in mind, which hopefully we don't think would work. So we're doing some more work on making sure that it's quite clear what we're working for. I think good progress with the districts, although you know there is a lot of resistance there, which is understandable. It's very useful to see what comes out of particularly the East Midlands deal in terms of how that will work, and indeed in terms of the Norfolk and the Suffolk deals as well, how in two-tier world you'll make that work. So I think we can get there, but it's just giving government confidence that they will move forward. We're doing everything we can. It's what you need. I've always taken the view, what do you want us to do to get this deal, and we go and deliver it. So every time we've changed to try and fit in with that, so we'll do that. But I think it's just those noises off and some nervousness about the mayoral situation. But as I've said at the beginning, it's coming, it's going to happen, and what you need to do is work with it to make sure you have a system where you can work with the mayor for the benefit of all the area which we represent.
Thank you, Martin. I'm just going to shift gears slightly from, I guess, in thinking about devolution, it's very easy, isn't it, to think about the sort of process, the politics, the governance, and obviously all those things are critical, but there is a policy objective. Devolution is to enable levelling up, it's to deliver tangible change on the ground. Ben, what does that look like in the East Midlands? What does your deal enable you now to do you think?
I'm pleased you're doing that, because after a year of that conversation, I'm fed up of talking about governance now and really keen to get into outcomes, right? And so the reason that we went for level 3 is not because it had this structure or that, but because it gives you the best outcomes in terms of powers and funds. So I very much see and have summarised the whole conversation there as taking a chunk of Whitehall and using that to pull all of us on a local level into some kind of system of collaboration, where we're in a structure that forces us to work together on those shared strategies and outcomes, and particularly in our initial deal around skills, around transport, and around economic development. We were hearing before in the trade session there about the importance of long-term stability and some coherence in terms of a figurehead or somebody to talk to around drawing inward investment. Well, that's an opportunity that we want to bring forward. But I've always considered that levelling up question as being, in terms of these kind of capital or economic projects, bringing the kinds of jobs, well-paid, high-skilled jobs, to areas that haven't historically had access to them, and then being able to build around that the package of both transport to get local people to them, and also the skills agenda that will allow our residents to be able to pick up those skills and qualifications to go and work in those sectors and take advantage of opportunities like that. I think the biggest early win that we've managed to secure already actually is something called Step Fusion, which we've had announced recently in North Nottinghamshire. And the joy of that, I think, part of the reason we managed to secure that is because we've got this devolution deal in the background. So this £20 billion government investment in clean energy, which will draw in huge amounts of inward investment from the sector, fusion nuclear sector around the world. And we locally can begin, even before that comes to fruition, it's a 20-30-year project, to put in place, as I say, those transport links, those skills, opportunities to work with our colleges and universities to really create those new chances and job chances for kids in Mansfield who in 20 years' time will be able to say, actually, I can be a nuclear scientist without having to go somewhere else, and that's unheard of. So those things, I think, are amazing opportunities for us. We also want to do, I think, in the next phase, the public service stuff that I kind of touched on before, to be able to join together more coherently our kind of offer in terms of those community-based services. I'm particularly keen on that, prevention, community, place-based work that I'd really love to see us devolve more powers for in the future, more funds, things that would be dead simple, actually. Take the Youth Investment Fund, and instead of me having to bid for it, just give it to me and let me get on with it. So there's those opportunities as well that we'll get into, I think, post-2024 once we've got the mayor elected.
That's really helpful. And Andrew, Norfolk, rural area, very unique set of challenges. It will be similar to a number in this room, but very different from the metro deals that have been done to date. Does the deal give you the tools you need to address some of those challenges? Do government need to go further?
Well, what it does, Rob, it starts the journey. I think that's probably the best way of putting it. One of the things that's still to be overcome is the fear in terms of the governance, the directly elected leader, mayor, whatever you want to call them, will be taking over everything. He or she will have total power over this, that and the other. Then that part of it's still to be overcome from a Norfolk perspective. But if you look at the way it needs to turn out for the future, then there's 3 or 4 key things. One is around what I mentioned earlier on about the priorities. Well, the priorities of what we want to do are well known. And when you think of a county like Norfolk, rural communities, 3 large places, coastal communities as well, big rural hinterland. So that's a pretty diverse area, to say the least. So we've got to try and accommodate all the things that people want with the historic imbalance of funding, and it has been that. And you look at just development in the county as well. Mantra is no development without infrastructure. Never happens that way. But this is an opportunity in starting this off to say, well, we've got something here that can play into getting the infrastructure needed before the development takes place. That's one of the key things. The other aspect is really what we can do around the skills sector as well. Now, Norfolk is not perhaps as well advanced as others in terms of skills. If we've got access, which we will have, to the adult education budget, it's access and use of that, then we can put that to far, far better use and really ramp up the skills side there. And I'd still come back to really what the entity of the county, not just the county council, but the county wants to see. And if we want to see everything better for everybody, this is a real opportunity to do something. And perhaps I'd look at it from the point of view, that opportunity is just literally starting. We're barely on the step.
Yeah.
Now, we've not actually announced the deal yet, so we're sort of saying things we shouldn't be saying in some respects, but we haven't actually formally announced it. But we are literally on that very first step. And then when you think when Ben Houchin came and talked to us with the minister last week, Deanna Davison, and he was explaining, well, in the first 5 years, we got another £900 million. So doesn't that demonstrate that the change is worth it? For the money you can leverage into the county or the area, shall we say, but also what you can actually do with that in demonstrate to everybody this does really work and we can deliver far, far better outcomes from it.
Yeah, no, that's really, really helpful. And if we can look forward sort of 12, 24, 30, 36 months a bit in this next sort of short section, obviously the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill needs to get smooth passage. Ben, can I be a bit cheeky and get you to put on your sort of other hat for the moment and just sort of give us a bit of a sort of sense of where you think that's progressing? Does the political volatility make that better, worse? How do you see the bill progressing over the next 12 months?
Yeah, well, it's been interesting wearing both hats in that context, because actually, whilst we're negotiating on a local level our deal, I've been sat on the Levelling Up Bill Committee and going through the kind of line-by-line stuff on that end as well, which has been really interesting. Knowing actually going through the line-by-line working committee a few weeks ago, that chances are the new government were going to tear it all to bits and change it all the week after anyway, so whether that's a useful use of time. But I think actually what is clear is Rishi is absolutely committed to a devolution agenda. Michael Gove similarly was there at the start of all of this, so I think at least there's some understanding, although ministers have changed within DLUC, that there is a level of continuity from that point of view. The bill comes back to the Commons this week at report stage, so very little change actually as far as I can see. Some things that we, from our local experience will flag in those debates this week, but we're on track as far as I can see, so that bill should be passed in the spring. There are some local risks because we've got all-out elections in our cities in May, so there's a PERDA period. We're quite keen for the government to get that through by kind of mid-March from that perspective to allow that, because then we need to do the SI, the statutory instrument that creates our specific deal, and hopefully that's done by the summer, so that then we can build that kind of shadow organisation and start to put that planning and strategy work together.
Oh, excellent. And Kate, we talked a bit earlier, you've had the 2015 deal. All being well, you'll have a 2022 deal. What does Cornwall want to do in terms of next? What does a sort of 2025 deal look like? What are you going to be looking to try and develop and grow as you look to the next stages of devolution?
Well, some of the things that our politicians are talking about that they want to see in future deals include, we'd like to see a much greater focus on the net zero agenda and consolidating all of the kind of the different pots and resources around net zero, nature recovery, adaptation, and what's currently in the level 3 deals is largely shaped through a BEIS and a DLUC agenda, and I think that there's much more scope for kind of the areas of kind of DEFRA to be coming on board, and us kind of developing some new templates for rural areas in terms of the role that we play in terms of shaping the economy. I think that whatever happens next with investment zones, and the Chancellor made clear that that kind of policy agenda that was there isn't going to continue as originally envisaged, but there was clarity that actually there would be consolidated single pots that comes from level 3 areas, and I think we've got to continue to absolutely push on that. Just as an example, I'm the local government representative on the Green Jobs Delivery Group. There are over 45 different pots of funding coming out of government linked just to green jobs alone from many different departments with no single controlling mind on it. That's a nightmare, isn't it, in terms of trying to work that through, which ones to bid for, which ones not. And I think that absolutely we've got to continue to push to use the devolution frame as the way within which that we get those consolidated pots. And of course, when we've been negotiating the Cornwall deal, as others sitting on this platform have, we're doing it in the context of we're in the middle of a CSR period, and actually we've got the hooks that are in deals for what comes next, so that we can make good in the way that Ben Hoochin was able to make good on those additional kind of funds coming through. And so we very much want to use the net zero, nature recovery, also on housing, as being clear with stronger powers around planning, particularly where there are particular local issues in Cornwall. No surprise you'll hear me talk about the importance of regulation in terms of second homes, Airbnb, and the impact that has on communities. And I think that the other two things is that the industrial strategy, which kind of we all worked on at local level, identifying those areas for real sector-based deals. I think that that's going to be a really important area next. And in Cornwall, we've got some particular contributions to play at a UK level, whether that's about space, whether that's about critical minerals, or whether that's about marine renewables. And I want to see further devolution deals that reflect those specialisms and those clusters, building on the comments that we heard earlier from Peter about the importance of clustering to attract FDI. And the public sector reform piece is something that we can't lose sight of. So, I think we still need to be pushing for answers around where those place directors are going to be. That joining up of actually how government works at a local level and building that in. So we're really interested in what more could we be doing in light of the kind of the education white paper about a real new deal in terms of how we work across with our academies around raising attainment levels, addressing social mobility issues through a new relationship between a directly elected mayor and those place-based delivery directors, also previously known as regional schools commissioners. And I think we've got something there that we want to use and build on for our next set of discussions.
That's incredibly helpful. Okay. Andrew, yes, sort of deal still to be sort of formally sort of at that point, but have you started to think about kind of what next, what needs to be done on the ground locally to start to make what you will agree a reality and some of the issues there? Can you help us sort of see the sorts of things you're working through?
Well, part of that is the acceptance of what the situation will be, and then play into that what the deal content is as well. I mean, it's not massive, but it is the starting point. So 2 or 3 things around how is the investment fund going to play out? What about these powers and responsibilities and the money that goes with it, the ring-fenced pots of money? How are we actually going to use them in the best way? But the most important thing really is to get everybody on board in the context of this is, looking at Norfolk specifically, a deal for Norfolk, not just County Council, but a deal for Norfolk, making sure that people buy into that. That's the most important thing. The other aspect of that is really how we can recover partnerships and work with those partnerships. Again, not just the district councils, and be wrong just to sort of single them out totally, but there's also all the other key players in the county. But let's also not forget how we manage the next stage of this through, if it's going to be that way, to 2024 in terms of the LEP, because those functions need to be sorted out from the county council point of view, and also with our neighbouring county, Suffolk, as well. So if we're following the same path, then there's a huge amount of work that we can do together. Yeah. LEP is one aspect of it, but the work that we can do together to think, well, if we're doing this in the same time frame with roughly the same sort of, well, it is very similar in terms of content, then we must have a lot to learn from each other and do together in that respect. And most of this, at the end of the day, Rob, is going to be taking the fear away from this. This is not a takeover. This is working together.
Yeah. That's really, really useful. And Martin, obviously, Lincolnshire weren't named in the white paper. What are you thinking about your next steps? How do we get government to sort of say, right, let's have...
All we can do is get ready, be clear about what we're offering to government in terms of a national economic agenda, and also try and work on a bit more consensus, bluntly, work on some of Ben's or my MPs to just make sure that I think we are getting there. Some are saying, well, I'm not keen, but I won't stand in the way. So more work to do. And I think more clarity from government, frankly, just how much, if we've got a deal to go there, how much will they say, well, it looks like it's a goer, and we're not going to listen to the odd voice who's sceptical. So obviously we'll see. I mean, one of the questions is that there was no mention in the Chancellor's speech last week about new deals, because we're all hoping very much that once they get the 12 or 14 deals, we'll get them sorted out. And I know there is a capacity issue at the department, because they originally were going to look to 5 deals 2 years ago, shall we say, and that's sort of multiplied to 10. So they have a massive capacity issue in terms of trying to get through all of this. So we hope that next year the government will say, look, right, we've got those and the commitment is everybody will be offered a deal by 2030, but we don't want to wait till 2030. We don't want to see others around us from a Lincolnshire perspective forging ahead with their extra investment and all the rest of it. And I think the other thing is that, which isn't really there yet, is talking about skills is part of the trick to this, I think, is having the ability, which I don't think the devolution deals offer yet, I think we talk in all our areas. You talk to any business, they say we wish we could match what we need as employers to the skills that have been provided, and there is a mismatch there. And in our area, we've talked about some very big projects which might happen, and it's all about skilling up from school days. So in 20 years' time or whatever, when these big projects come about, there is the local skill set, so people are skilled up, ready to do that. And instead of, in a lot of county areas, people leave to other areas and then probably come back when they've got a family to live in the nice part of the world. So it's about doing that skill set to make sure you keep the people there, keep the high-tech people there who can do all this work and stay there. And I think at the moment, bluntly, the government won't let go. And frankly, that is still a nationally controlled situation, which I don't think is working. But we're not getting very far on that. So I think from a local government perspective, that's probably where we need to keep pushing. Give us more control over skills and how they're provided, not just adult education, a more serious how we can do that provision. Because locally we know what we need in our areas, because we know the local businesses and we know what they want more than they do in Whitehall. So that's a different conversation. I think that's the big win for me, apart from the extra investment and the more simple lines of communication when people want to invest.
Yeah. Excellent. I'm sure you found that fascinating. We could go on for much longer. I'm conscious that coffee is waiting. But before I close, I just want to ask Kate and Ben, sort of, just in a sentence, what one piece of advice, Kate, would you give to the people in this room who are kind of weighing up, do we pursue a county deal or not?
I think that at the moment we're going through a really interesting time, aren't we? We've just had COVID, we're in cost of living, we've got a next change around climate change coming down, really big threats. I think about actually where does this fit in terms of giving you some more tools in your toolkit to help you to address those longer term risks and opportunities. Because I think it is an important contribution. I think that local authorities are best placed to do the joining up at a local level. I'm really confident about the role that local authorities play, but we need to do it through looking at those different time horizons and the issues that are facing us and thinking, actually, does this better help my place enable us to face and realise the opportunities and deal with those risks?
Excellent. Ben, what would you say?
Yeah, two things. I think the first is what we touched on earlier about outcomes. It's very easy to get bogged down in this structure or that structure, but ultimately, what outcomes is it we're seeking to achieve here? And I would hate to think that places would go, well, I'm not going to take those opportunities because I don't want a mayor, I don't want whatever. If it means having the powers, the levers, the funds to change people's lives for the better, give me 10 mayors, whatever, let's just be able to deliver those outcomes. And I hope that's where people will focus. The other thing I would just say is, Martin referred to MPs as being a pain in the arse. I'd make no comment. But the relationships are massively important in all this. We've done a lot of work with our districts and boroughs and other stakeholders to try and bring them with us. And I think even though the deals now don't require their consent, we probably wouldn't have been able to get this over the line in the timeframes that we have without those that work and those relationships. So the more that colleagues in the room can do to just bring those partners with them on that journey, I think the easier people will find it.
Excellent. Well, thank you for listening. Please join me in thanking Kate, Ben, Andrew and Martin